we're now going to bring out Mitchell Green, who is our VP of Analytics. He'll be introducing our analytics panel as well as moderating.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Mitchell Green, head of the Collegiate Soccer Society's Analytics Division, sophomore here at the university. With me today for our analytics panel are Lucy Rushton, who's the head of technical recruitment and analysis for Atlanta United in MLS, Caleb Shreve, who's data analyst for Nashville SC in MLS, and Bret Myers, who's a professor at the Villanova School of Business and also works as an analytics consultant for Columbus Crew. And so I'm going to open up to them. Guys, tell us a little bit more about your background. We'll have an order of Lucy and Caleb, and then Bret. We'll stick to that order throughout, and then at the end of each, once everyone talks, we can jump back in and add, if you please. Yes. So Lucy.
Hi. Yeah, my name's Lucy. I am currently head of technical recruitment at Atlanta United. Previously was a performance analyst at Reading Football Club in England. My background before that was I went to UWIC, which is University of Wales Institute Cardiff, to study my master's degree in sports performance analysis. And that's where I fell in love with analysis and kind of found my way in the football world.
Hi, Caleb Shreve, currently the data analyst for Nashville SC. My background is actually in law. Before starting in Nashville, I was a criminal defense lawyer. Decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life and went back to grad school and was actually lucky enough to have a class with Bret Myers there. So that's sort of how I got here.
I guess it's a segue into me. So hi, Bret Myers, professor at Villanova University, also analytics consultant at the Columbus Crew. I guess my journey started as a player. Played in college at the University of Richmond, played a couple years professionally with the Richmond Kickers, but that professional career didn't go too well. So that's kind of why I ended up in an academic path, and things came full circle. I started researching in sports analytics and soccer analytics, and it was at a time where there weren't many positions that were departments or anything. This was back in the late 2000s, kind of early teens. And so kind of through some relationships, I was able to first start with the Philadelphia Union, consulting for John Hackworth, who was a coach at the time in 2013. And then a contact of mine, Tim Bespachenko, got the GM job at Toronto. So I spent 5 years at Toronto from 2014 to 2019. And now have followed Tim Bespachenko, who's now president and GM at Columbus Crew, followed him there. So current team.
Great, guys. Bret, I'm a big John Hackworth fan. He's coach of my local USL team right now. So
no way. Good.
Yeah,
great guy.
So I'm a big fan of him. Let's just jump right into what the current state of soccer analytics in the United States looks like. So what's it used for? How's it involved in decision making? And what is sort of the relationship like between coaching staffs and the analytics departments?
For me, I've been here for, I think coming up 5 years now. And analytics has really evolved in the time since I moved over here. I remember when I first come over in MLS, probably maybe even 50% of MLS teams didn't have an analyst. And now I think we're up to 100 now, I'm sure, 100%. So I think every club is supported by an analyst. And that is basically just a sign of the state of analysis improving throughout the country. I've found that the quality of analysts in MLS is very high, very high. Really intelligent people who know what they're doing, and you have a good combination of video analysts. So your traditional kind of support the team with live match day coding and first team analysis, to actual data scientists working in clubs. And even in the Championship, which is the second tier in England, there's not many clubs that have that foundation, that have that like data scientist role. So for MLS clubs to already have that in place shows a real kind of commitment, I think, to analysis and to developing the field. My role at Atlanta United is more in terms of the technical recruitment side of things and scouting. And within that, again, it's very advanced in terms of the tools we're using. They're consistent throughout the world. So the tools remain the same, whether you're in England or Germany or USA. The platforms we use as analysts are pretty much generic. What I found over here is that the support staff, i.e. the analysts, are really, say, advanced in their statistical backgrounds and knowledge, which, say, you don't always get in some of the European clubs. They focus more maybe on the subjective kind of like soccer knowledge of their staff. So that's for me a big plus over here. In terms of the relationships with coaching staff, that's going to vary depending on the analyst. For example, someone in my role, I have not too much kind of interaction with the coaching staff and players because I'm more work with the front office. But your first team analysts, they're really tight with the coaching staff. They travel everywhere with them. They literally, and as an analyst, you have to be basically your manager's brain almost. So you need to know what they're thinking, how they want things done. So you're really tight with the manager. And then with the players, you develop that same level of kind of relationship so that you know how to support them best. And I found that here in MLS as well. Our analyst has always been really tight with the coaching staff and really a really important part of his unit.
Yeah, I'm echoing off what Lucy just said. At Nashville, we have a performance analyst, Augie, and he does most of the video work and is embedded with the first team staff and is definitely responsible for trying to constantly be inside Gary's head and know what Gary's going to want from a match analysis standpoint. In my role as the data analyst, it's more trying to support the match analysis with data and then also having a role in our recruitment and trying to assist our chief scout and our scouting coordinator with flagging targets and researching them. The role or the relationship between the coaches and the analysts is interesting. I think it gets overblown a little bit. I think it's just a relationship like any other relationship. It's communication and time and trial and error. And you get used to how other people want to receive information. And it's just trying to be intelligent about taking that on board and giving people the information in the way where it's most impactful for them.
Going last is tough because you guys have nailed a lot of the key points. But from my perspective, in going off of what Lucy was saying earlier, I mean, when I started and it went back a few years before that, there really were just maybe a few analysts here and there. But now it's at the point where there's like the legitimate departments that are being formed. There's multiple analysts with clubs. I mean, I think you can go by recent expansion teams. I mean, look at what Atlanta United. My apologies, Lucy. There's so many FCs and United, it's hard to keep track. But you look at what Atlanta did and everything really, how they built a club. You look at what Nashville is doing now, Austin, and it begins with hiring analysts and forming a department. So I think the touch points were mentioned. There's obviously going to be use cases with coaches and opposition scouting, in-game decision making. There are opportunities that are there. The sort of the front office, whether that's the director of scouting, technical director, GM, sporting director, using that to evaluate players and teams and use it for scouting purposes. There's also sports science where there's plenty of need for data. I think the problem becomes the fact that analysts, I feel like, are stretched a bit too thin. There's so much data that we have now, and the budget kind of is what it is. The economics are at the current state and tight right now, given everything that's happened with COVID. So I think if front offices had the opportunity and the resources, they would even look to expand further. I think that's kind of where a lot of clubs are.
Great. I know you all work with MLS clubs mainly, but I was wondering if any of you had anything to say about the state of analytics in lower divisions in the U.S., so USL all the way down.
You want to reverse? Were you looking to reverse the order?
Yeah, we can do that.
I don't mind going third each time, but I think, and actually to lead off with this, you know, I don't think it's a matter of buy-in and belief. I mean, I think that a lot of coaches that I've interacted with, the skepticism has lowered. I mean, there's always going to be, I think, a bit of tension between what you're seeing with the eyes and what your beliefs were, and kind of what you know about the game versus what the data might reveal and some of the implications to that. But I think the problem with the lower divisions becomes the financial, just being able to afford quality analysts and build departments. It's just the economics are not working in one's favor. I mean, Caleb, Lucy, and I we're very privileged that we now have tracking data. Like all the off the ball movements are being captured, and it's really opened up doors for new metrics to be derived. But to my knowledge, I don't think that the lower division teams are able to. I don't know if there's even providers that are capturing that, and whether or not any of the clubs can really afford that, because we had to convince our owners to pay a pretty decent amount to have like a league-wide deal with Second Spectrum. So I think that's part of the problem, is the financial. I don't know. Pass the torch to Caleb. Because I know that with Nashville, they were USL, but obviously converted into MLS.
Yeah, obviously my own experience in USL was a little non-traditional, because I was brought on with the intention of being an employee of the MLS team. So I was really just sort of enjoying the last few months of the USL ride. I do know some of the data providers are now covering USL. I think StatsBomb just recently started covering USL. I was talking to a volunteer analyst for Austin Bowl, and he was talking about how they were just recently able to get event data. So definitely want to echo Bret's point about the tracking data. In some ways, it is an intimidating amount of data, and the resources you need to accurately interrogate that are what I would imagine would be challenging at that level. But there are definitely clubs that are trying to get to the bottom of event data. I know Richmond Kickers have a data analyst. So it's even down to the USL League One level that they're starting to be buying.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say actually how probably like the analytics support for each club is a little bit dependent on the club. With us, like for example, Atlanta United 2 is obviously a feeder club, if it were, to Atlanta United, so they can tap into some of the resources that we have with Atlanta United. So I think there's quite a few USL clubs that are like that, obviously, and so probably the support they get from a staffing point of view probably comes from their first team club. As you just said as well, Caleb, there's a lot of data providers that now cover off the USL leagues. I know that Opta for a number of years has covered USL, and so you've got the full data sets there, exactly the same that you would have for an MLS team, you have for a USL team, which is pretty good, to be fair. So the standard and say the standard of analysis overall at that level, I think is improving and growing, because clubs are placing more emphasis as well on using their USL teams to bring up players through to their first team. So naturally, you want to have that kind of data comparison and the ability to cross-reference across your whole club. So yeah, I think it's in a healthy position.
Great. Next thing I want to touch on is, Lucy, I know you have some experience with this with Atlanta, and Caleb with Nashville, but I want to talk about what was the role of analytics in helping to build Atlanta and Nashville from scratch as expansion clubs.
Do you want to go, Caleb, or do you want me to start?
Who you can, anyone can start. It doesn't matter.
I can fire away if you want.
Go on, go for it.
Sure. I think it's almost more challenging because you don't have an existing product to analyze. You're looking at names on a board and hoping that they're complementary pieces, but you've never seen them play together in your environment. I'll use Dax McCarty and Anibal Godoy as an example. Before we brought them in, we definitely thought that they would be a complementary pair in the midfield, but we had never seen them play together. Now that we have a year under our belts, we actually have some profiles that we've seen be successful in our environment and have a much clearer base for our opinions. As far as the role of analytics, it's always just trying to supplement decision makers. AJ Swoboda at 21st Club had a conversation with me about how he sees the role of the analyst. And it's not to be the smartest person in the room, it's to try and make everyone else in the room smarter. And I think that really does get to the meat of it, is you want to be trying to help your decision makers make the best decision possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, say, I know it's all about really, I look at it as reducing risk. So with any player, there's going to be a risk of signing them. You don't know how they're going to translate to your team, to your club, to the area, if they're moving from a different country, everything. But what you're trying to do with analysis is just reduce that risk, basically, of making the wrong signing. We used analysis fairly extensively in our process when we were building out the club. And yeah, the hardest part really is starting the jigsaw. It's like, how do you get that first piece and then build around it? Because that first piece ultimately impacts on so many other pieces. So you kind of really need that first piece to start building around and start giving you direction, because before that, it's just kind of like ifs. Well, what if? Well, what if we went? Well, what if? Well, what if? And you can't fill in any of those blanks almost. I've got to say that I found the process absolutely fascinating. And like, you know, how many chances do you get to build a team from scratch? And so it was incredibly like insightful, but say the kind of the biggest difficulty was committing to that first piece. And we used analysis, say, really extensively to help us, not just from a data point of view, but obviously from a video point of view as well, and looking at to assess the different roles that players could potentially have at the club. So yeah, it was and still is a massive part of our club. But yeah, that process of building from scratch is, you know, as Caleb said, just like, where do you start kind of thing, and you don't have any basis for knowing how certain individuals might work together. So yeah, that's the biggest difficulty.
In my experiences, I haven't worked firsthand with a build from scratch, approach, but when I started with Toronto, it was new leadership, new management. So the roster was going to kind of take a bit of a renovation. I think with Columbus, it was more about kind of taking a core and then sort of building on that core and supplementing with the right pieces. But I think regardless whether it's an expansion team or you're trying to kind of revamp a roster, it becomes important to, I think, understand. I think the coach's philosophy is going to be important. Kind of being able to translate attributes like positional attributes, central midfielders and wide players and center backs and strikers, and and I think the sort of this collaborative of the head coach being able to verbalize what they want in players, and then the front office and also the analysts to sort of translate that into things that can be measurable and that scouts can look for, or that analysts can derive KPIs. And so I know a lot of my work when I first started with these various clubs has been to help identify the data-driven KPIs for certain players, usually by position, then that, gives us a focus. And then, I can present, here are the top, X percent players in this position based on the KPIs. And I think that kind of exercise helped. I know that there was a question earlier about sort of that collaboration, the harmony between front office, coach, analyst. And I think that exercise that I described right there is important, and it's useful for whether you're building an expansion team or trying to improve an existing roster.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, that's the process we went through actually in building the roster from scratch. It was very much about, right, what do we identify as our club philosophy and playing style? And then individually within that, within each position, what are the key subjective demands for each position? And then the analyst role is to say, okay, what stats marry up, or what KPIs marry up to those subjective definitions. So yeah, that was a key process, and I think it's I think you've hit the nail on the head with saying that that's a really good way of going about it.
And then there are the MLS specific nuances that you have to think about the player designation, and I mean the way in which you're going to scout and evaluate your designated player. There's going to be extra level of detail and that's going to go into and rigor that's going to go into that process, but yet it's still important. If this is an international player, a senior or young, or you've got free agent types, veterans in MLS, and domestic American players, or players that you look for coming out of an academy that homegrown declared or coming out of the draft system. The GM Tim Nespachenko that I've been working under has an expertise in cap management. So fortunately, he instinctually has a lot of knowledge there. But what he's realized is just that you have to view the roster like a pie chart, and you really have to do your due diligence in each of those areas. But of course, you have to think about the cap side, and so yeah, ideally you could look at this roster and you could find who are the best players, but there's a price tag that comes with that too. So that becomes obviously part of the equation with MLS, which is different prospect than maybe when you're talking about clubs, European clubs, South American, and they don't have the cap type structure. It's really about budget and how much the owners are willing to spend.
Yeah, totally. Having worked in England, the very much a transaction is, A, do we want the player? B, does the club want to sell? And C, does the player want to come to us? And if the answer to all those things is yes, then the deal goes through. If you can arrange financials, obviously. But as you said, with MLS, there are so many other factors that you have to play into it that just can make the deal. Even if the clubs want it, the player wants it, there are so many other things that can throw off a deal. And so, yeah, that's a tricky one, which keeps you on your toes, and I think increases the value of analysis and the need for analysis in MLS.
Absolutely.
One other question I had on in terms of squad building is I'm sure it's different for every club. So in your all's experience, does most of the squad building philosophy come more from the front office, the GM, those guys, or does it come more from the head coach, the manager, whoever that is, and wanting to get his guys, as a manager may say?
I've actually had experience of two different ways of working at two different clubs. So Reading, it was very much kind of manager driven in the sense of, we brought in a manager and as you said, they would have a philosophy and a way of wanting to play that we would then go and kind of scout players for. So it was very much fluid to the manager. At Atlanta United, it's completely different. It really is a club philosophy, which we have really put into place from the start. And then regardless of our manager, that philosophy remains the same. So we're buying players for the club and not for a particular manager, so that if and when that manager leaves, and we have had, managerial turnover over the last couple of years, you're not suddenly having to scout for a whole different subset of players. You should already have the players that you you deem kind of valuable and the right fit for your club. And then it's about bringing in a manager who can work under that and manage it. So I think we at Atlanta United always really, or the player profile was always driven by our technical director and our front office. That's been the case since I got here. And it's funny because, you know, we built out those player profiles back in 2016. And then I think it was about a year ago, we reviewed them to be like, okay, do we need to change anything, get more specific? And there was like minimal that we changed. And it just goes to show really that, you know, and that was through us changing managers, and actually, you know, everything had stayed the same in terms of the profile of player we were looking for, despite us having a new manager. It's because we have a club ethos that drives us.
Yeah. Our player profiles, I would say, were a very collaborative effort between the coaching staff and the front office. Obviously, we have yet to change a manager. Hopefully we never do. But I'm sure that'll be a test of how timeless our profiles are. I think you need to obviously have your manager's game model in mind when recruiting for players. It doesn't make sense to recruit a player if the manager doesn't want them. But I think the front office's role is trying to drive a recruitment policy that will be sustainable over time and keeping the future of the club also in mind.
First, I just sort of acknowledge, I mean, the beauty of soccer is that there can be so many different like playing styles that I feel like it can lead to success. But I think it's important to have a consistent and a clear philosophy that's made clear, and and I think what I've seen is that the coach is very important in that, you know, because ultimately he or she is going to implement that within, you know, with the first team, and that is going to, you know, drive a lot of the implications with the club. I think with you know, when you think about translating that playing style or, you know, philosophy, those principles to the academy, you know, I think there's a balance. Like, I don't think you want to be too, because you want, you know, when you're developing young players, like, I think they need to be versatile and, you know, be able to be flexible in their thinking and to adapt in situations. And so, you know, and I just, what I noticed with Toronto, playing, you know, having Greg Vanney as the head coach, who is a very cerebral, almost professorial like coach, is that he had his principles of how he wanted to play, and he was very good at articulating that with his players, with the rest of the front office, with the academy. Like, when he first started, he was actually the director of the academy, but that didn't mean that the team had to actually put out a specific formation every time. You know, that I mean, in particular in 2017, which was a really good year for Toronto, there was chunks of that season when they were in a 3-5-2, but then come MLS Cup, they went in a 4-4-2 diamond, and that was, I know they got criticism on the broadcast for kind of, you know, setting that way, but it turned to be successful in the end. And so I guess and I know the fundamental question was about kind of the, you know, who is kind of laying out the vision for the team. But I think what we all kind of agree on here is that collaboration. Whoever's initiating this, I mean, I think the collaboration between the coach and the rest of the front office and the scouting department, that's really important to have. And so managers do come and go. That's the interesting thing. And I think that's where I think if you really want to have a sustainable club, there need to be certain processes and departments that you have in place that, you know, can easily be, you know, passed over to the next manager, and that you hire a manager who is going to have some kind of shared vision with the team, but yet that manager still is going to have significant influence to shape a roster the way that they feel they need to you know, to be successful. So finding that balance is important.
Great. Let's let's look ahead a little bit. Let's look to the future of analytics in soccer. So what are some things that we might see analytics used for in the future that it may not be used for right now, or may not be widely used for right now? So is there anything that you all foresee in the future?
For me,
Yeah, you want to go, Lucy?
I go on, and yeah. For me, I think the development of like relational play and sequential analysis is becoming more and more important. So rather than looking at individual elements of the game or individual players, you're starting to look at sequences of events and combinations of players. And I know that may sound obvious. Well, we do team analysis, so isn't that combinations of players? Well, yes and no. I'm talking more about the specifics of, and there was a really good example of Fernando Torres when he was at Liverpool, and Steven Gerrard. And there was a lot of analysis done around how Torres was scoring his goals and the combination play that he had with Gerrard in particular, and how fundamental that was. And I think you see that when he left and he went to Chelsea and he didn't have their relationship. He wasn't the same player. And I think analysis, the more we go on, is coming into those kind of areas where we're starting to look at, okay, if we're going to recruit this player, what are the requirements in terms of the players around him, and how do people work around him? In terms of this sequential analysis, that's more kind of, as I said, like combinations of events, so sequences of play. And again, just figuring out, rather than a one single action, what actual combinations of actions are effective effective at certain teams, or at certain, for certain individuals, at creating key moments. I think that's where analysis is going to go, and we've started to see it, and I just think it's going to increase. The other area I think we need to get better at, but I think we are getting better at it, is more of that kind of off the ball analysis. So anything at the moment, anything which is in possession and can be accounted for, so a pass, a shot, a cross, it can be analysed and coded, if you were. Where we're struggling is really those off the ball moments, where a player doesn't actually have an interaction with the ball, but it's a key moment in the game. So defensive positioning, player movement, those kind of things. And I think, we need to get better at that in analysis. But I think, in the future, we'll continue to make strides in that.
I think this is an area where it's sort of instructive to look at how analytics has gone in other sports. Like you look at baseball and basketball, and the initial analytic takeaways were mostly focused on recruitment and actual like roster construction, what player prototypes are most effective together. And then eventually they get to the actual match analysis. So in basketball, that's been the 3-point revolution. In baseball, you're seeing just homers and strikeouts now. Baseball and basketball, to a lesser degree, have now reached a third stage where it's player development, like the rise of driveline baseball. I think P3 in basketball. Ajax has a biomechanics lab now. I think that's an area where you're going to see a ton of growth in the next 10 years. It is starting to get away from just the recruitment and the match analysis and start looking more at player development.
Yeah, so before thinking about the future, just thinking about the past. And I remember, and this is early on when I got into this, it was so new to have access to event data. The fact that there were 2,000 ball events that you can analyze for the game, which is a useful data set, and it's one that's important with scouting. But I think, now with tracking, being able to get the off the ball insight, that I think will become even more transformative than it is now. And I think that it all depends on how well that can spread to different competitions, and then it can be used for scouting purposes. So the improvement of player evaluation, and also of sort of team evaluation and tactics using that. I mean, right now, analysts are spending a lot of time just trying to kind of wrangle that data. There hasn't been a whole lot of time, at least in my experience right now, how we can kind of leverage that information. So I think continuing to build. I mean, we saw expected goals metric kind of come out from the event level data. I think I think clubs will be innovative in how they can derive metrics, and then I think this point was being made earlier, but I think the sort of the spreading out this and being able to have more coverage of lower competitions, but also within a club like the academy games, and just having better ways to use data to track players' development. I'm not convinced how well that's being done right now. At least it's not. I don't think the on the field performance metrics are really being done at the youth level. So we're getting more coverage there, and better tracking within clubs to see the progression and use that for development purposes. And just having so much information and to just make better judgments and evaluations all together.
Caleb, you mentioned baseball and basketball, and that sort of got me thinking about one of the great things to me about soccer. One of the things I love is the variety in styles of play between teams. I love that. But in sports like baseball and basketball, you're starting to see efficiency take over and styles of variety and style of play sort of go away. Everyone's playing small ball. Everyone's shooting threes all the time now in basketball. If we, as analytics continues to grow, and as we start to get to a point, as in those sports, that teams are optimizing efficiency, that's what they care about over style of play, are we going to start to see variety start to go away in styles of play?
I don't think so. I think you're already seeing a move towards optimization of on-field tactics, but because of the wide range of successful strategies in soccer, I don't think you'll ever see like a basketball where everyone is only taking threes and layups. The average shot distance in the Premier League has gone down the last 5 years in a row. Teams are trying to make more efficient choices, but there's still so many ways that you can get to that shot closer to the goal. In basketball, people complain about the threes, but teams get there very different ways.
It's my turn. So I think, to Caleb's point, I think that there will continue to be variety in approaches. I mean, I think sometimes with these trends we see, there's a bit of a copycat tendency that happens. And so I think the more that the teams try to shift towards one approach, it sort of opens up an opportunity for someone to do something distinctive. And we've seen it happen at the international stage. I mean, if you go back to 2010 with Spain and the success of Barcelona, it was all about tiki-taka, and that sort of was done in an even more efficient way by Germany and kind of their style. But then we saw in 2018 with like France and Croatia, kind of more of a transition, almost countering type of approach was better. And then we've seen recently with Liverpool pressing and counter pressing, and so I think the game is always going to, there's going to be evolution, but then maybe sort of cycles of approaches that become more. And I think it just depends on personnel being able to ultimately execute on the philosophy, and it takes time to develop that. So my hope and my optimism is that when we talk about the data, the technology, there's more information out there, that it just continues to foster that creativity, so that you can recognize an opportunity and capitalize on it, and be on the cutting edge of a new trend in soccer. So I don't see a convergence to a specific approach.
Yeah, I'd agree with what the guys have said there. I think they've hit the nail on the head. I think football is such a dynamic sport with so many moving pieces, which make it different to a basketball or a baseball or something like that. Even the like the field dimensions just make it a different ball game altogether. In that there's so much more space for differentiation, and so I just think that there's always, as you guys have said, there's always going to be an evolution and phases where teams like copy and go, oh, that's been effective for so and so, so we'll try and implement that. But I think everyone's going to try and do that within their own kind of subset of way, and just the dynamics of a team and the makeup of your team just is going to influence what you can ultimately do. So yeah, I don't think we'll get to a stage where everyone's doing the same thing and it kind of cancels each other out. I think we're still going to have very much an ever-evolving kind of sport of changing tactics and formations, etc.
Great. We've got one more thing I want to cover before we jump into Q&A, and that is advice that some of you may have for young people, college students looking to get into soccer analytics as a career path.
For me, the biggest thing I can say is to try and get some experience of working within soccer, whether that be with your college team, kind of a professional, like lower level team, an MLS team, doing some kind of work experience. Just get that first-hand experience of being around the place and actually seeing what analytics is used for. So that when you're presenting information and presenting numbers, you can see the application of it, because that's the most important thing, the application of the data, and not just presenting data for data's sake. Because we can all kind of throw around numbers and stuff, but there has to be a meaning and there has to be an end product to why that information is important and how it can translate to improving performance, whether that be for the coaching staff just on the training pitch, your technical directors and how they want to scout. There needs to be a direct kind of influence on performance. And so I think anyone looking to get in the industry just needs to be in a position where they can see that. And so my recommendation would always be just to try and get some work experience, or say even with your college team, start being an analyst for them. Start knowing, okay, well, why is this data useful? How am I going to use it? How do I interpret it so that I give the coach what they need? That's going to be the key to kind of making good kind of traction, I think.
And I'll just sort of build off what Lucy said there. If you don't have experience in that environment, the biggest thing I think you can do is show your work. Even if it means starting a Medium blog and showing that you can communicate the ideas that you're taking away from the data, that is way easier to engage with in an interview than if you're just listing that you were a member of the JV soccer club in college. If you have actual work product that you can show us, whether that be in R or in Python or just a blog. Like I wrote for StatsBomb a couple times before I got my job at Nashville. I had a Medium blog where I was showing what I was doing with data and with coding. Obviously, the experience in the environment is the most valuable, and that's what really stands out on a resume. But if you don't have that, I think you need to be finding ways to show your work.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the questions coming in, but I think you have to be kind of a pragmatic optimist when it comes to, a career in soccer analytics. And what I mean by that is it's okay to hope. And I think that you have to have a mentality of just being relentless in the pursuit and not fearing rejection, but also just be realistic about what's required, and what's going to make you an attractive candidate and ultimately land you a position. So a lot of you are still in school and you have the ability to take classes. And I imagine that there's a number of you, if you're interested in this panel, you're probably taking maybe the coding or the statistics type classes. That's obviously, in terms of skills, competency is going to be very important. there's opportunity. Yeah, there was a great series on Friends of Tracking online and sort of opportunities to work with data. To Caleb's point, having that ability to be a self-starter, to do your own work, it's almost like keep a portfolio that you could showcase. And then to Lucy's point, if there's something that you can do, and sometimes you have to be the initiator of that opportunity. So if it's, I mean, I guess a lot of you are affiliated with Michigan. The question is, do they have some kind of opportunity there for an analyst to on the men or the women's side to work with that team? I know that's happened in a few other places, or even reaching out to a local club and seeing if they, there's an opportunity that's there, because I think that having a bit of field experience going into the bigger positions, that's going to always be helpful. And then I think I was listening to the last panel before ours, the sort of the networking and relationship building are going to be important. There's a savvy to that. It's not just a matter of just purely building LinkedIn contacts and just getting a lot of connections, but really trying to work on those relationships and correspondences and phone calls and meetings. And I know that we're in a tough time right now in a virtual world to do that, but I think there's still some opportunity that's there, and you get that foot in the door. I mean, I work with Caleb on this, and I see, he was talented, and certainly a front office would benefit from him. But Caleb was, he was relentless in his pursuit and looked for a lot of different opportunities. So, and he did those things he described. He got picked up by a media outlet that would do, where he could do some storytelling with the data, and that's an important skill for an analyst. But there's that opportunity for you all to sort of do that at an amateur level, and again, build a portfolio for yourself. So a lot of things you could be doing, and a lot of you have time on your side with it, being young.
Well, great. Guys have been great. We're gonna jump to a few questions, whatever we have time for in the Q&A section. One I'm seeing a lot. One from professors. What statistical techniques should I be teaching my students who want to become data analysts? And there's a couple more that are skills that students who are wanting to know some skills that they can learn possibly independently to increase their chances of landing opportunities.
It's a good question. I think in terms of the techniques, I mean, regression is a clear one. Both linear, non-linear techniques. I think data mining techniques, clustering, principal components. I mean, I think I found those to be useful. But then just some of the basics in data visualization as well are important. So I think I don't find that the statistical testing has been so much of what I've encountered firsthand, but I think the fact that there's so many variables and reducing that dimensionality becomes an important technique to be able to use. That'd be my answer there.
Yeah, I completely agree with Bret on the techniques. I'll talk to the skills a little bit, and I think that varies based on what kind of position you're looking for. If you want to be a video analyst, if you can try to figure out a way to get your hands on sports code or Speedio and start live tagging games and showing that you're adept at that's going to be the move. If you want to be a data analyst, you need to get on Friends of Tracking and start trying to figure out RStudio or Python. I think what's most important is having a skill development plan and understanding how that is going to help you get where you want to be.
And then just to further what Caleb was saying, I think, going back to the stat class and using R, if there was any doubt, I mean, that's obviously a great tool to use. Python is very popular and useful as well. So I think in addition to the techniques, having students comfortable in a coding environment is increasingly becoming more important.
And I'll shout out Devin Pluller's Python handbook. It is a great place to start if kids want to learn Python.
Yeah, from my point as well, I would say that I think Bret touched on it there, was like a product like Tableau, for like data management and visualization. I think that's becoming increasingly important. So I think to have some kind of understanding and working of a product like that, is really fundamental too.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. In Tableau, they have academic licenses that they will give out. So that and we use a little bit. Sorry, dogs barking. We use a little bit of that at the crew as well. And obviously, that Tableau is going to blend very nicely with Excel. So that's a viable tool, in my opinion, too.
Great. So somebody was asking about the use of analytics in terms of looking at ticketing and marketing to expand fan base. I know most of you guys work with recruitment, but do you guys have any experience with that?
No, not me.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that, and obviously that's an important application right there, and I think it's common that that you're seeing now. There are actually business analytics departments that are being formed, but it's a kind of a different different part of the organization, and so I think that the typical model is you kind of have the sporting side of the organization versus the more pure business side, and they don't traditionally collaborate. Although I've seen in some instances, I know with the Philadelphia Union, for example, I have a graduate student who works in the business analytics department, but they've brought he expressed interest in doing some of the first team work, and they've been good about allowing those business analysts to go over and to kind of help a bit. But I wouldn't count on, one of the things I think you have to navigate through when you're thinking about career options is that if it's on the analytics side, you may find there's a lot of opportunity, but it's opportunity on the business side. Don't count on being able to transfer from one of those over to the, in this case, the soccer ops, because there are, even though you're united on the same organization, there are some different objectives within each club and different mindsets, and usually it's just kind of separate parts of the building, or entirely different buildings, or completely different floors. But it's an interesting theme, I think, kind of what goes on the business side versus on the field. We're all related under the same economic model with just the revenues and expenses in the club. So, good question.
Cool. I think we might have time for one, maybe two more. Somebody asked, Memphis Depay used Sci Sports as a consultant to determine which club would suit his playing style best. As a sports agent, do you think hiring an in-house consultant to help to use analytics to help decide transfers that would help the development and career of progression of players? Would you say that would be helpful?
I think I missed the first part of that question. What was the?
It's sports agents trying to bring in analytics consultants to help determine what clubs would best suit their players when looking to find their players a club.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for agents to leverage performance data for different purposes. Maybe it's to understand potential matches for their players, their clients, or just to understand that player's maybe his intrinsic value or her intrinsic value versus the market value, other conditions that would drive salary. But I think what's being described there is probably more useful for a scouting department. That scenario where, I think sort of seeing, I guess it's like, okay, we're about to lose a player. That player was very important to our team, and we'd love to go out and scout someone who's a similar fit. I think that's a more likely case than I think an agent just trying to match specifically because I think what the player is going to want. They're going to want kind of certain features of their contract, and maybe will limit some possibilities of places they want to go. But I don't think it's going to be so. I don't think it would be good to make it like strictly performance data driven on where that client should go.
Yeah, I think Bret, you've hit the nail on the head there with that. I don't really have too much more to add. I think it can have some value if you're looking for styles of play, and but I think those things are very obvious from an external point of view anyway. If you have a very technical player, possession based, and maybe Spain is a good kind of market, those kind of obvious ones, but clubs change regularly, so to kind of limit that might be dangerous as well. So yeah, I think it's more of a scouting department, and you let them almost do the work for you. They know the player they kind of want, and they've seen value in your player for their club. So whenever any club is looking for that, it's kind of like if they've identified one of your clients as a potential good fit for their club, then it would be risky to say, oh no, we don't want him to go there because we don't like your style of play or something, because they may be wanting to change the style of play and you're seeing your player as a key component to do that. So it could be dangerous.
Yeah, just one more thing I'll piggyback on there is the incentives are completely different for the player and the team. Like the player benefits the more clubs that are interested in him. So trying to limit to just clubs that he feels like are a good style fit could hamper the market for him. Whereas at a club, we're looking at tens of thousands of players and trying to winnow that down to a roster of 30. Definitely agree with everything Lucy and Bret said there.
Great. I think we're about out of time. So apologies if we didn't get to your questions. But Bret, Caleb, Lucy, you guys were great. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and good to be with all of you, especially Caleb, Lucy. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for having us. Great job, Mitchell.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. We're going to send the room back to the main room and move on to our next panel. Thank you, guys.